Okay, hello everyone. I'd like to first thank Bússola Tech for hosting me today to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing at the House of Commons in Canada with respect to continuous improvement, which relates both to the projects that we undertake, but also some of the digital transformation in our Parliament. So today I'd like to focus a little bit less on technology and a little bit more on people and process. This is to build a little bit on a presentation our clerk, Eric Jantz, gave earlier this spring with Bússola Tech, talking about modernization initiatives in the Parliament and the types of things that he as the senior executive at the House of Commons would be thinking about. So I will introduce myself. My name is Natalie Foster. I am a clerk assistant at the House of Commons in Canada. I am responsible for a few different things. So one, the team that creates Hansard, committee evidence, and committee reports. They report through to a director on my team. I'm also responsible for a team that does the business side of technology projects. So making sure that our teams in procedure, in committees, in the House, and in our International Affairs Department have the tools that they need to do their work effectively to support members of Parliament. And I make sure that through that team that any transformation projects that are done in partnership with our IT department, that we represent the business side or the business needs of that process. So I had another director responsible for that line of business. And finally, I'm also a table officer. So if you watch the House of Commons on Canadian television, or if you catch it online, I'm one of the people that would be sitting in the chamber giving advice directly to the speaker, to the other deputy speakers, to members of Parliament, and to the parties directly about the rules of procedure in the House. So that's really my expertise. So as I mentioned, today I'm here to speak about a little bit less about the technology, a little bit more about the process, how people work together to achieve these goals, and some of the structures we have in place at the House of Commons to allow that to happen. So I thought before I get into too much detail about our process, it might make sense to share a little bit about the strategic plan of the House of Commons. All of this information can be found online on the ourcommons.ca website. So if anyone is interested in seeing more about our strategic plan and the different pillars, you could feel free to go find that information there. It's all made public. This is the vision and the mission for the House of Commons for the years 2023 to 2027. So this is a process by which the House of Commons tries to identify risks and opportunities. It then lays out a plan for how to move forward on some of those risks and opportunities. That plan is approved by the clerk, and then after that, it's approved by our Board of Internal Economy, which is a management board that oversees the work of the House of Commons, made up of members of Parliament from all the recognized political parties, and is chaired by our Speaker. So we ensure that the plans and the strategies we have in place align with the needs of the organization, but importantly, the needs of our members of Parliament and parties to ensure they can do their work effectively as representatives, as managers of their offices, and as those who would legislate in the House and do their work in committee. So the vision that we have for the House of Commons is the vision of one House, one team. The House of Commons in Canada has close to 2,000 employees, or just over 2,000 non-partisan employees that work for the administration itself, not for members of Parliament. And we make up a variety of different directorates. We like to refer to it as a village. So there are folks like me that work in procedural services. There are, of course, legal professionals. We have finance and HR professionals like you might find in any organization. We have digital professionals, IT professionals. We have those that manage our renovation, construction, and property. We also have a whole team of folks who manage what we call our operations. So room setups, room allocation, catering services, transportation services. We have security services as well. So a really wide range of teams that are doing different things to deliver on what members in the organization need. And the vision of the one house, one team is the idea that when a member requires a service, or the public may require a service, say through committees and being a witness, that we operate as one team to make that happen. And we're not asking the member or the public to try to figure out, do I call HR? Do I call finance? Do I call procedure? But rather that they know that they can have one point of entry an easier point of access, and that the team will get behind providing that service. So that's the vision. And then the mission that we have, I just want to read it because I think it's quite important for what I'm going to present, is that together, where everyone has a voice, we innovate, anticipate, and respond to the needs of the House and its members in support of parliamentary democracy. So I want to underline a couple key points here. Obviously, our purpose is to be here to support our members and parliamentary democracy, to make sure that our institution functions well. But also the idea that we would innovate and anticipate needs. And so we're not just being reactive, but we're trying to be proactive as an organization to serve our members. And finally, the point, which I think is also quite powerful, is the idea of everyone having a voice. So the idea of trying to cultivate the best value ideas, the best plans, the best possibilities from any level, any team at the House of Commons. And you'll see that infused through the presentation. Often managers or executives can be quite removed from the front line of service delivery. And so it's the idea that we can cultivate those ideas and that those experts are in some cases best placed to figure out what our clients need and to implement change. So before I talk about the structures that the House has in place to encourage continuous improvement, to encourage that kind of cultivation of what our frontline employees and workers are seeing as to what the members need and how we can be more effective, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the theory of continuous improvement. And this is really building on something that our clerk, Eric Jantz, mentioned, that he doesn't so much see the modernization of Parliament through the lens necessarily of modernization per se, but through the lens of a process of continuous improvement, of always aiming to learn and to achieve and to grow as a team in order to make sure that we are responding to the needs of members, which of course do change over time with technology, with what's going on in the political, national, international landscape. But putting that focus on continuous improvement, I think brings the focus more to the fact that there are always incremental changes we can make and that it doesn't always have to be a big transformation to make a change. And so maybe drawing attention to the one side of the screen where we see traditional leadership approaches, which is where from the bottom, they may say, okay, we have this problem, we've noticed this, we need to solve it. And there's a top-down approach to impose or to suggest a solution. And then, of course, the frontline employees would then attempt to implement that solution that's very much imposed through a traditional hierarchical model. What the theory of lean leadership says is that the problem is something that could be identified at a more strategic level, and the solution should come from the people who actually have to implement it and have to do the work. And then the role of leadership becomes one of coaching and mentorship as opposed to one that would impose a solution. You sort of see this same thing in the other diagram in the Hoshin-Kanri model of management. The different visions that different levels in the organization should have. So senior management setting the vision, setting some objectives, and that's what you see in our strategic plan. Middle management identifying the strategy to execute and some of the resources, but the implementation teams being the ones to action, to schedule, potentially to measure, to review, to give feedback, and that continuous loop of trying to coach, of trying to focus and ensure that there's an agile approach to service delivery change or to continuous improvement. So how have we put some of those theories in practice at the House of Commons? I wanted to talk about a few groups that the clerk identified in his speech that he gave earlier this spring. So first of all, we actually do have a team, a continuous improvement team at the House of Commons that is dedicated to the task of continuous improvement. They are embedded in the office of the clerk and do report through the chief audit officer to the clerk. And they are available for any team at the House of Commons to contact to talk through an issue, an idea, a process review. A lot of the time when we think about improvement, modernization, change, we go straight to technology. But I think in reality, some things can be resolved by looking at a better process, a more streamlined process, by just documenting what the process is. And this team is skilled and trained in some of those lean management principles to enable us as business partners or as those working on the front lines to see how we could improve those processes. So at any time, someone can reach out to that team and can ask to be led through either a complex or simple continuous improvement process, depending on the scope of the project. And for some of the major projects, that's actually embedded into the process to make sure that the process is adequate and apt for the job that it's trying to achieve before we would layer on technology or resources. So that's one team that's available to anyone at the House in their project planning or their improvement initiatives. The second group that the clerk created a couple of years ago now in 2023 is a group called the Corporate Planning Advisory Group. And I do sit on that group as a representative for our procedural services. So I have some insider knowledge as to how that works. But the vision of the clerk was to create this group of senior leaders and executives who could take a cross-functional look at all of the different projects that are ongoing at the House of Commons, whether they be transformational or whether they be a life cycling or whether they be required by law or legislation, to ensure that the organization is putting the right resources and the right time and effort behind those projects. There's even this idea of trying to take a broad view, and this is a bit of a newer initiative from the clerk, to look at even the operational projects going on in each team to make sure that everything is optimally sequenced, appropriately resourced, to ask some questions, and to really consider the perspective of members. So we want to make sure that in all of our attempts to improve and do more and be our best and innovate, that we're not overwhelming our members either with too many new systems, tasks, or approaches to learn, because after all, we need to make this a seamless experience for them. They're really there to legislate, to represent their constituents, and to do the best that they can to build our country and to build what we need to do to go where we need to go as a country in the future. And so to make that as simple, as seamless, as easy as possible without overwhelming them. And so that group is meant to have that corporate overview and then would make recommendations to our clerk and recommendations to the clerk's management group to ensure the optimal prioritization, sequencing, and funding that ultimately the clerk is responsible to approve. Recently, we've also been adding on some more intricate measures in terms of the deliverables, our level of achieving them, the resourcing required, the burn rate for a project. And this is meant also to help us to learn how accurate we are in forecasting what we're able to achieve with the resources we have, so that we can learn more about our organization and the types of things that may stall projects, that may slow them down, or the things that may speed them up and improve them and have us deliver them faster. So that group is really dedicated to that work, and the clerk is very enthusiastic about that group continuing its work to ensure that the House of Commons is continuously improving, but with a mindset to appropriate stewardship of resources and ensuring that our members' needs are actually met. To do that, we have an intake process that I won't get into too much detail on, but when you have a major strategic corporate initiative, there's a specific process that must be followed. And then this group is able to apply a prioritization framework to the different projects that are proposed to essentially come to a measure of what we might recommend to the clerk's management group and to the clerk for approval. So we're looking at a few different dimensions when we are evaluating the projects. We're looking at the benefits and impact to the organization. That includes things like strategic alignment, whether it's responding to the needs of the member, whether it's dealing with a major corporate risk that we had foreseen, or whether it's a compliance issue with legislation. So we're looking at the benefit and impact to the organization on one end, and then we're comparing that with the investment and effort required to achieve it. So you could have the best idea in the world, but if it's going to take 5 years and multi-millions of dollars, it's perhaps not the one that we're able to execute right away. And so it's always balancing those two. Whereas if you have a project that maybe has a medium benefit or impact, but it's a very low investment of effort or resources, and you can do it and achieve it quickly, that might be something that you want to prioritize. Then we do all of this in consideration of the resources we actually have available, the people, the funds, the technical know-how, if that were to be the case. And we're able to offer to the clerk a suggestion as to which projects should proceed through the process, which are recommended. And then the follow-up I mentioned in terms of its deliverables, the support that it may need, and the funding that it needs to achieve it. I'll show you in a minute a little bit what that looks like. But we want to be able to essentially create a heat map where we can say, these are all of the projects that are proposed. We would recommend we hold on these. We would recommend we proceed with these. And we also make sure we're balancing large scale projects with smaller scale projects as well. This group is also responsible for planning for the next House of Commons strategic plan. So I mentioned the original one is set to finish in March of 2027. And this group is also trying to help define with our corporate planning team what the next strategy might look like. So providing some input from all of our different services, from what we see coming from a risk perspective, and helping to support that team in calibrating what they're hearing from executives, from employees, and from other teams in terms of expectations for the next strategic plan. So this gives you an idea of the type of thing that the House of Commons Corporate Planning Advisory Team may produce. I've taken the names of the projects out, but this is a real heat map, if you will, of some projects that we were looking for in the past year at the House of Commons. So when we do that benefit and impact, which you see on the bottom axis, the higher impact, it goes more to the one side and the lower impact on the other side. And then we combine that and plot that against on the vertical axis, the investment and effort to get it done. And so you end up with a heat map that gives you a big sense of what are your very high impact, but maybe low investment projects versus high impact, high investment projects. So you know that you're trying to balance those things and you're not trying to do too much that's in that bottom quadrant, and you're trying to spread out your value. And then some that maybe fall in the lower value and high investment and effort, you may question if that's something that you want to do immediately, or if it's something that you may want to wait until either the investment is lower or the value proposition is higher. So this is part of some of the products that we would present to the clerk in order to see if the initiatives are worthwhile pursuing. I wanted to say a few words then about the ideal planning cycle and where the group is trying to go. As of right now, a lot of the projects that are proposed do align with the strategic plan of the House of Commons, but we would like to change the planning cycle a little bit to get ahead of things. And so when we prepare our next strategic plan that would be published in April of 2027, internally, we'd like to have a very solid draft ready almost a year before that, so that teams can already see where the House is going strategically, what we're trying to plan to do, and we can get ahead of the planning cycle by pre-planning projects and not having to be reactive after the strategic plan is launched publicly. We're also trying to make some improvements towards data. So the way that we collect data both to propose a project, what data do we have to support that the initiative is important? What data do we have to monitor during the project that it's going well and that it's achieving the objectives that we set out for it? And how do we get a little bit better at ensuring that after the project is complete, that it's actually met the targets that we set out for it? So we do this to a certain extent, but we'd like to gain a lot more maturity in this area and to implement it and integrate it more fully into our planning cycle. So I mentioned already a few of the improvements for the future, the idea of advancing the current planning cycle that we have so that teams can be better resourced to prepare and to plan out projects, so that once the project is approved, they can go ahead, do their hiring if they need to, do their resource planning, their resource allocation, and they're not having to catch up afterwards. We'd also like to start looking at our projects and our strategy as a series of problem statements. So rather than giving a very broad category, for example, improving service delivery to members, we can instead turn that on its head, and the executive can, as per that sort of continuous improvement model I showed earlier, identify some problems that they're looking to solve. And then the call out for projects can be more specific, and people are able to send in project plans that attempt to address the project or the problem that's identified, whether it be to resolve the problem, to mitigate the risks or other things that might be introduced by that problem, or to try to see it in a different way. And that way, the corporate planning team would be better equipped, I think, to identify, measure, and track whether those projects are making meaningful progress towards solving those problem or opportunity statements that might be made. We also want to ensure that we're continuing with that one team approach. So consistent evaluation by that corporate planning team that allows us to see the connections between the projects, the teams, and the services offered. So one big value that I think has come out of that corporate planning group is that by seeing it as one team with that cross-functional support and the cross-functional representation, is that we're able to recognize a lot sooner in the planning process when a project might affect another team, or when a project might have a greater impact if we were to consider it more holistically. And so we're able to identify those earlier in the process, and we'd like to continue building on that so that projects are done in a way that are most effective and efficient for all teams involved. And finally, we'd like to improve on the reporting on progress that we do, so that we can allow for regular adjustments to projects. We do try to use the agile methodology for a lot of our technology projects, but we obviously have other projects as well. And being able to track progress more specifically, to report on it more regularly, and to see where we're at in the process and whether the data coming out of the project is moving meaningful change, either towards that problem or opportunity statement, we would be able to potentially adjust projects as they're in flight instead of waiting until the end to see and measure an outcome. So I wanted to apply just very quickly how we're taking that approach with artificial intelligence at the House of Commons, and how we're using some of those same ideas to embark on this transformation process. So I'm not going to talk about technology here. I'm really going to talk about people and strategy. So the first way that we've leveraged this idea of the continuous improvement and the cross-functional work is that the working group that we've set up, which I co-chair with a colleague, Christopher Henry, at the House of Commons, we've set up a multidisciplinary table. So we have representatives from all the different service areas at the House, the same way we do in that corporate planning team, to make sure that we're getting that cross-functional view of how this entire program of artificial intelligence will impact the House of Commons. We're also ensuring that we're doing constant communication. So we talked about that bottom-up and top-down approach. Obviously, we're making sure we're communicating certain guidelines, certain rules, certain processes that employees have to follow, but we're also looking to cultivate what employees on the ground are experiencing, seeing, and feeling so that we can adapt our projects and adapt our approach to AI at the House of Commons. So to that end, we've been doing consultations with our managers, with unions, with employees, to try to get a pulse check and a sense of what they need to see from this program of artificial intelligence at the House of Commons to feel like they're supported through this change. We also have a long-term vision, which we're trying to align with the strategic plan of the House and the corporate planning process in order to develop a strategy for AI use at the House and to make sure that our members are supported and that we are following the latest regulatory and legal framework that's in place. And so in doing so, for our strategy, we're trying to do a very open and consultative process on this. We currently are planning to launch our strategy in the fall, with the clerk's approval, of course. And so right now we're in the mode of the draft strategy and the consultation process to make sure that it speaks to employees and that we're really getting that feedback from all the different layers of the organization so that we can even embark on a continuous improvement process with what we're proposing for the organization itself. In order to do that, we are leveraging this cross-functional team, some of the communications channels that we have in place to make sure that that strategy reflects where we need to go. Maybe just a couple words on the relationship between the House of Commons strategic plan and the AI strategy, because the AI issue, I guess, or the opportunity emerged after the House of Commons strategic plan was already published. We've decided to develop a very short-term 2-year strategy so that we are able to deliver on some important things that we need to do, whether it's to mitigate risk or to support our employees through this change. over the next 2 years before the renewal of the next House of Commons strategic plan. And it's our expectation that with the renewal of the next strategic plan, that AI may find its place in there, and therefore it would become one unified strategy. Maybe a couple of words on the long-term vision of that strategy and a little bit where it's going. I won't spend too much time here, but just to sort of indicate the areas that we're curious about and we're interested in through the strategy. Of course, in the strategy itself, we're trying to define corporately what's our ambition, what's our risk tolerance, how will we report, how will we tie into those existing structures to make sure that we're following existing corporate planning processes through our work. We're continuing the focus on communication. So are we getting our feedback regularly from employees? Maybe some videos and events that explain, that help train, that help support the change that we're having here in terms of technology and opportunities with AI. We're looking at policy review. So the idea that we make sure that our policies are up to date to reflect new risks and opportunities presented by AI and that they're updated as required. We have a set of guidelines we've already published for our employees, and those exist internally. And we've recently published some preliminary information for our members, for the new cohort of members coming in for the 45th Parliament. So making sure that they're supported with some information on how to limit risk, how to mitigate risk, how to use the tools safely and effectively that exist out there in the ecosystem. And we're considering the need for any guardrails. So are we looking at tools? Are we looking at risks and mitigation strategies that will further support those guidelines? Finally, the corporate planning process, as I just described earlier, there is an existing corporate planning process to launch projects, and we want to make sure that any AI investments are fully aligned with that process, that we have a line of sight on it as the AI working group, and that we're able to report on progress and help support that corporate planning team in terms of its prioritization of investments. So just to close, I just wanted to give a little sneak peek of some of the things that we're considering as part of our AI strategy at the House of Commons. This is based on research in terms of industry best practices, things that we've heard from our employees, and of course, alignment with our current House of Commons strategic plan. And so the 5 pillars that we're currently looking at in terms of making some progress and action on include the idea of strategy and governance. So do we have the right systems, structures, and guidance in place for employees and members to effectively do their work in the AI space? Are we managing our data effectively to have it leveraged and used by these tools? And are we managing risk appropriately and in accordance with what would be expected from the public, from members, and for our employees? What are we doing for the employee experience to make sure that employees are supported through any changes that may come, whether that be training, whether that be upskilling, whether that be allowing employees to share how they are. Again, back to the idea of continuous improvement. There are some very innovative and creative people that are already finding interesting and very low-cost ways to improve productivity through the use of these tools. So allowing them to share and connect with each other to enrich that experience. Of course, the client experience and making sure that the client is supported, protected, and that they have the tools that they need to do their work effectively. And finally, it is the smallest one arrow on that page, the idea of projects and value. The goal of the AI working group and the strategy itself is not to prescribe or to enforce or to suggest projects, but rather to provide the framework through which projects could be considered by the organization. And so this is really to align and build on the work of those corporate planning advisory group and also the continuous learning teams that are already in place at the House of Commons. So I just wanted to use that as an example of how we're leveraging some of that theory of continuous improvement, of cross-functional collaboration, and of bottom-up information, even to inform our next steps on artificial intelligence at the House of Commons. And that will conclude my formal presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie, for the very comprehensive presentation. I took a few notes, actually more than a few. I'll try to keep to the main questions first. To congratulate to and your team on the multidisciplinary approach on AI. That's something of absolute importance for colleagues to adhere to. Hear colleagues from legal, from HR, from procedural, the members. As I usually say, the biggest challenge on AI today is not a technical challenge, rather is how to incorporate it into the business of the parliamentary procedures. And also to congratulate on something that House of Commons is leading the way, which is having a human-centered modernization strategy as well. Something that I think it's of absolute importance, and you're paving the way with new strategies that help other colleagues from other parliaments as well to get inspired. I'll try not to make all of my questions here, but I'll select a few of them. I do remember, and I actually wrote about this a while ago, about the decentralized development of solutions by individual offices, colleagues of solutions that do not impact the corporate strategy of the House. So, and I saw that when you mentioned about the lean leadership. So my point is, what are the advantages and disadvantages of allowing for this decentralized development of solutions by the individual offices, and connecting these to your later point on AI? How could the House of Commons advance on its AI efforts in this matter, now that most of the AI solutions allow you to create tailored versions and tailored assistants, and using your own data to create a solution that will help on your particular business requirements? So what is your take on this particular element of this decentralized development?
So thank you. That's a very complicated question. I'll do my best to answer it effectively, but feel free to jump in if you'd like me to clarify, Luis. But essentially what Luis is referring to is the model that we have at the House of Commons, where in our technical team, they work by what are called product lines. And so rather than have one group that attempts to solve all the problems, there are smaller sort of tiger teams, if you will, that are able to attack certain groups of products and certain groups of problems together in very close collaboration with the business. So one thing that I think works really well from that perspective is there's a technical product line around legislation and diplomacy. And those are tools that we use to serve the House, to serve committees for the legislative process. And then my team on the business side is able to embed and work directly with those programmers and with those technical experts to achieve certain ends. So in that sense, you see that lean leadership and that idea of continuous improvement that's built into even the model of how we structure our teams. And there's a knowledge and an understanding within the teams, which I think is maybe one of the risks that we've attempted to mitigate, which is that you need the team to understand where they're allowed to co-create safely on their own, and where they need to escalate something into more of a corporate process or a corporate planning process or a formal project review. So the teams do sort of understand what those rules are, but it allows them the space to co-create within what they're able to do with their existing and allocated resources without always needing to go through a formal project plan. So I think that's a benefit of that approach. You just have to have the right structures and rules in place so that people understand when something needs to be escalated. A very slight downside to that we are looking at, and part of what the corporate planning process is meant to help with, is that sometimes what one team is doing could have a great benefit to what another team is doing. And we don't always have the visibility on that because we've empowered the teams to sort of create and co-create and think together. We don't always see the broader picture, or the teams themselves don't always see the broader picture. And so part of the idea behind the corporate planning process and trying to expand a little bit more into some of the operational things is for that planning group to get a better sense of what's going on cross-functionally so that they can make some of those connections for the different teams and try to optimally sequence that. In terms of how that relates to AI, I think we're still working through that. We have developed that cross-functional team, as I mentioned, so that we get different perspectives on AI strategy and where we might go. The goal of that group is not necessarily to overtake those small teams that are able to co-create with each other, but rather to set the framework so that, again, it's another sort of layer of what are you allowed to co-create, what are you allowed to do, and then what turns into more of a project plan or a corporate project. So that's the goal of the strategy, is to set that framework so that folks understand how they could propose and develop projects, but they also understand where they'd be allowed to co-create themselves. I think one thing we're hoping to do with the employee experience that I made reference to is a better sharing of use cases that have been successful, that maybe don't rise to the standard of a big corporate project that requires investment, but it's something where maybe someone in their small team or group realized a success, and to be able to publicize and share that information so that someone else can learn from that team's success. So we're trying to blend a whole bunch of different things together here, but I think you can see how that lean approach hopefully plays into the AI strategy as well.
Thank you, Natalie. And it's interesting that you mentioned that in many parliaments, we found very interesting experiences that are being run in the individual offices. Let's say in the office that runs the participation channels, or in the office that runs the website. Not necessarily they have been incorporated in the modernization strategy as a whole, but when you dig deeper, you see that colleagues have incorporated, for example, new AI tools like ChatGPT, Gemini, to improve their processes in quite an ingenious way, if I would. So, and sometimes it's even harder for us to see that happening. And as you mentioned, other colleagues could benefit from this internally and externally as well. So imagine that colleagues on other parliaments having the same challenges, and if they knew and had access to this. So, and that brings me to my next question regarding the corporate planning advisory group and the risk assessment before accepting a specific project. How is the risk assessment done, and what are the elements that you are concerned about? My focus would be here on your expertise from the procedural point of view. What are your main concerns when making the risk assessment of a specific project?
Sure. So I'll maybe back up a little bit. We do have a corporate audit and improvement team that does conduct corporate risk assessments. And so every directorate does this on a regular cycle. And we're going through a process right now as we prepare for our next strategic plan. So that gives us a big picture of risk at the house and the profile and the opportunities that, not only the need to mitigate risk, but the opportunities that may be presented by certain things like AI, which is both a risk and an opportunity, I think, for legislative organizations. So we have that in the background. We also have a sense of what the clerk views as some of the major risks to the organization, which is maybe a refinement of what some of those different organizations, those different service areas have identified as risks. You can imagine that a risk for someone in procedure might be different than a risk for someone in HR, for example. So we do have that information, and risk is actually one of the measures by which we evaluate the benefit or impact of the project. So we have a few different measures that we use, but the measure to which a project mitigates a corporate risk is one of the things that is being evaluated by that group. And then I think another measure that particularly perhaps from the procedural point of view that is emphasized is the impact on members of Parliament. So the question as to whether the measure is going to be useful, whether it's going to be helpful, the percentage of change that it might represent for the members, we're trying to take that into account. Did the members ask for it? Did the members request it? Is there a motion asking for this project? All of that goes into the benefit and whether it needs to be scored highly in terms of organizational value. So those are some of the things that we're looking at. There's a broader picture of risk, but in that group itself, we're also trying to see to what extent the project is aligned to our strategic planning and resolves the risks that we see for our organization.
Thank you, Natalie. And coming to my closing questions. First, to recognize something that I found to be very interesting in your presentation about the idea of furthering agile oversight. I think it's something really interesting, allow you to have a very quick course correction in project implementation. Usually that's one of the challenges that we see when implementing large projects in different parliaments. So my question to you would be on the implementation of such projects. How are you evaluating the success of the implementation during the implementation? And after the implementation, you mentioned that this work by the one team that you are hoping to improve. Is this feedback-based, or do you also have other elements in addition to this? And how do you incorporate the feedback from the colleagues in the business areas into implementation course correction that you might do?
So this is an area where we're trying to gain a lot more maturity. So I don't want it to sound like we solved the equation, because then I think I'd be very wealthy as a consultant if I managed to figure this out, because I know it's a perennial problem. Right now, in terms of project evaluation, we set up a business case and a desired outcome. We have deliverables, we have resources attached to those, and that tends to be what we measure. How successful are we at meeting deliverables? How successful are we at staying on budget and on time and on target? And those have been the traditional measures, I think, that a lot of organizations use. Where we want to mature, and I think this is a multi-year journey, so I don't want to say that this is going to happen overnight, is getting a lot more agile. So before a project is implemented, being a lot more conscious around what is the problem or opportunity statement and what data backs that up. And so if you're a little bit more specific about what you're trying to change or the needle you're trying to move, as the project is implemented, if you have your baseline metrics, you can see if the implementation of the project is having the desired effect on those baseline metrics. And if it's not, it may cause you to pause and question, okay, do we just need to invest more, or do we need to actually pull back from this project because it's not making the impact that we thought? At the end of the project, once it's delivered and it's been in place for a little while, being able to see what the impact has been on those baseline metrics. So whether it's during mid-project or whether it's at the end of the project, really being able to judge, did the investment solve the problem or contribute to the opportunity that we saw? That requires a lot of data, it requires a lot of maturity, and it requires a lot of reporting. And so it's not an easy process, but part of what this corporate planning advisory group is trying to do is to move towards that a little bit more specifically, so that the clerk and leaders from all departments have that information available and can attempt to adjust a little bit more agilely, I guess, during the project. And I think the last thing I would say is some of the experience that I've had implementing technical projects is that you can't deliver a project and then walk away and think that that's the end. I think we have to be a little bit better, even within the House of Commons, at post-implementation measurement and post-implementation support. So if I think about a project we implemented in our team for the automatic speech recognition for Hansard and committee evidence, we are still working, even though the project was launched almost a year ago, we're still working with that team to refine, to adjust, to measure, and to make sure that it's delivering the value that we thought it would deliver when we launched it. And so I think you can't just close a project and walk away. You have to also commit to some time afterwards to adjust, to refine, and to manage change within the teams as well.
Thank you, Natalie, for your comments, and thank you for your time today making this presentation. Congratulations again for the amazing work the House of Commons that Eric Jensen has been doing, you have been doing, Christopher and Harry, and so many other colleagues that I would not make justice of them if I started naming all of them. So many are going way beyond their attributions to make the House of Commons more accessible, more modern, more receptive to new technologies. So I'd like to recognize this work and to thank you. And if you have any final message for colleagues before we conclude here, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. I'd like to thank you, Luis and Bússola Tech, for the opportunity to share. I think the great work you're doing to connect different parliaments so we have a space to exchange ideas is wonderful. A lot of learning from others and from what others are doing. It's a constant source of inspiration. So thank you to others for the sharing that they do, and for your team for providing some space for us to do that for each other.